Welcome back to another lecture. To frame our discussion, our subject today is the Pamela Smart case and the 1990 murder of Greg Smart in Derry, New Hampshire. I am Alexei. Let's get started.
Hello, I am Priyanka. Thank you for joining us today.
Before we get to the complexities, let's begin with a structural overview. Pamela Smart, aged 22 at the time, was convicted in 1991 as an accomplice to first-degree murder, conspiracy to murder, and witness tampering in the killing of her husband, Greg Smart. The prosecution argued she orchestrated a plan carried out by her underage boyfriend, William Billy Flynn, then 15, with friends Patrick Randall, Vance Latheim Jr., and Raymond Fowler. The killing in May 1990 in the Smart's Dairy condominium was made to look like a burglary. Investigators later concluded the scene was staged. Smart admitted an affair with Flynn, but has consistently denied planning the murder. The jury rejected her account, relying in large part on testimony from the teen co-conspirators and secretly recorded conversations captured by student intern Cecilia Pierce.
Professor, may I ask something simple first? Could you define the main legal terms here in plain language? Accomplice to first-degree murder, conspiracy to murder, and witness tampering. And maybe also explain plea bargains, since they were important in this case.
It's important to understand the terminology. Accomplice to first-degree murder means one intentionally aids or encourages another to commit a premeditated killing. Liability attaches to planning or facilitating the act with the requisite intent. Conspiracy to murder is an agreement between two or more persons to commit homicide, plus an overt act toward that objective. Witness tampering concerns attempts to influence or prevent a witness from reporting or testifying. As for plea bargains, they are negotiated agreements whereby defendants plead guilty to lesser charges or receive recommended leniency in exchange for cooperation, often testimony. In this case, the teens entered plea arrangements before Smart's trial, which created strong incentives to testify against her. This, combined with the concealed recordings, formed the evidentiary backbone of the state's case. The sentencing consequences diverged accordingly. Smart received life without parole, while Flynn and Randall became parole eligible and were released in June 2015 to lifetime supervision, with Latheim and Fowler also entering parole, and Fowler later re-entering under supervision. Now relevance. This case remains a touchstone for thinking about media and law. It was among the first U.S. trials to allow TV cameras in the courtroom, creating a continuous public spectacle in which jurors, witnesses, and lawyers operated under observation. Pamela Smart later argued that pervasive media shaped narratives and influenced perceptions. The HBO documentary Captivated, The Trials of Pamela Smart, revisits that claim and the unprecedented conditions of access. In 1991, the long-term feedback loops between televised trials, public opinion, and post-verdict processes were, arguably, poorly understood by both courts and the public.
It makes me wonder, at the time, did people grasp how cameras might change courtroom behavior, or even which details got amplified outside the courtroom?
To some extent, they did not. We observe that performative elements proliferate when an audience is present. Consider the prosecution's rhetoric. Assistant Attorney General Diane Nicolosi described Smart as an evil woman bent on murder, a phrase that traveled easily into headlines. Or the arrest itself. Detective Daniel Pelletier's good news, bad news line was captured on tape and replayed widely, compressing a complex homicide probe into a memorable soundbite. Even biographical footnotes, such as Smart's Florida State University radio persona, the Maiden of Metal, became narrative hooks. These details, while not dispositive of guilt, shaped a public frame through which the evidence was interpreted. Let's state two essential facts clearly. First, investigators concluded the killing scene was staged to mimic a burglary gone wrong, with Flynn shooting Greg Smart while Randall was present and the others waiting outside. Second, Smart's tie to the case began with her affair with Flynn, whom she met through a high school program, Project Self-Esteem. She acknowledged the relationship and has said her husband might still be alive had she not engaged in it, even as she denies directing the murder.
Chronology helps. May 1990 was the month of Greg Smart's murder. And in March 1991, after a 14-day trial in Rockingham County Superior Court, Pamela Smart was found guilty and received a mandatory life sentence without parole.
To elaborate, an anonymous tip in May 1990 led police to ask Cecilia Pierce to wear a wire. The resulting recordings undercut Smart's reconciliation narrative. She was arrested in August 1990. Years later, the teens became parole eligible and were released in June 2015, while Smart remains at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York, to which she was transferred in 1993 under a commissioner-to-commissioner arrangement that her family says they were not told about. Her appeals were ultimately exhausted by March 2023, and in 2024, she issued a videotaped statement accepting limited responsibility while maintaining she did not orchestrate the murder. Speaking of personal interest, I have long studied how media environments alter perception. Televised trials present, if you will, a laboratory without a control group. When cameras point at a courtroom, we must ask whether we are still observing proceedings or observing a performance of proceedings. This case made that question unavoidable. This brings us to three big questions. First, historically, how did media portrayal influence the Smart case? Second, counterfactually, what if cameras had not been allowed? Third, prospectively, how does media coverage affect juries in high-profile cases today?
Professor, I'm curious about the first. How do we gauge the influence of media portrayal on what actually happened inside this trial, beyond just saying it was on TV?
We cannot compute a precise coefficient of media influence, but we can map mechanisms. First, agenda setting. Cameras and the attendant coverage privilege certain storylines, notably the adult school staffer and the underage boyfriend, which dovetailed with testimony that Flynn was 15 and, as he testified, sexually inexperienced before the affair. Second, framing. Portrayals emphasize seduction and manipulation, aligning with the state's theory that Smart sought to avoid an expensive divorce and collect a life insurance policy of approximately $140,000. Third, evidentiary salience. The Pierce wire recordings provided concrete audio that contradicted Smart's reconciliation narrative, and audio travels well in broadcast packages. Fourth, authority cues. Televised rhetoric from counsel, including Nicolosi's characterization of Smart as a mastermind, acquired amplified reach. Finally, narrative closure. The good news, bad news arrest clip functioned as a dramatic hinge that many viewers implicitly treated as resolution rather than initiation of due process. Each element conditioned how the public, potential jurors, and later decision-makers encountered the case.
Building on that, do you think the wire recordings became so prominent that they overshadowed other pieces of evidence? And how did the press treat motive claims like the life insurance and divorce angle?
It's crucial to understand that wire recordings are unusually potent because they offer seeming immediacy. The listener feels present at the scene of culpability. In this case, prosecutors argued the tapes showed Smart's awareness and involvement, whereas she claimed they were misinterpreted and that she had no foreknowledge of the plot. Broadcast media predictably elevated the tapes because sound is editable and compelling. As for motive, coverage frequently repeated the state's assertions about divorce and the policy, not because journalists adjudicated truth, but because the charges and courtroom statements by officials are, by convention, quotable. Meanwhile, other evidentiary threads, such as the staging of the burglary and the precise roles of Randall, Latime, and Fowler, were often compressed into background sentences. The result was a narrative architecture in which a few vivid pillars bore most of the weight.
To shift gears a bit, the counterfactual. What if TV cameras had not been allowed? Would reduced media scrutiny have changed anything essential about the verdict?
We can infer that the core evidentiary landscape would have remained. The co-conspirators' pleaback testimony and the Pierce recordings existed independent of cameras. Jurors are instructed to decide solely on the evidence admitted at trial. However, the absence of cameras likely would have altered saturation, tempo, and tone in the public sphere. Fewer sound bites, less real-time commentary, and perhaps less pressure on courtroom actors to perform. Would the verdict itself change? I would be cautious. The trial lasted 14 days. The jury heard testimony under oath and had the tapes. The more plausible differences lie downstream: public perceptions, the subsequent clemency climate, and the long arc of how the case was remembered and discussed.
So yeah, moving on to consequences. Could a less televised case have affected the politics of clemency or the broader sentencing narrative? I'm thinking of her 2005 pardon denial and the 2023 loss of her final appeal.
Executive decisions such as pardons and commutations are not purely legal calculations. They operate within public meaning. In 2005, the New Hampshire Executive Council unanimously denied her request. By March 2023, her last judicial avenue closed. Had there been less entrenched public framing, the space for mercy-based arguments might have been wider, though we cannot guarantee outcomes. Notably, the teen's later parole in 2015 to lifetime supervision created a stark comparative frame. Smart remains non-parolable. The televised origins of the narrative likely contributed to why the case stayed culturally salient long after most homicide trials recede from memory.
Now for the present-day question. How does media coverage, including social media, impact juror impartiality in high-profile cases now? And what safeguards really matter?
In simpler terms, the information environment has accelerated. We observe three pressure points. First, pretrial publicity. Narratives often crystallize before charges are filed. Second, in-trial amplification. Live blogging, clips, and commentary can convert discrete rulings into viral talking points. Third, post-verdict reverberation. Outcomes are relitigated in public, shaping future juror pools. Safeguards exist. Careful voir dire to screen for bias. Change of venue in extreme cases. Strong, repeated instructions to avoid media. In some instances, gag orders or sequestration. And tighter control of cameras or live feeds depending on jurisdiction. Yet none of these fully neutralize ambient awareness. That is why research, experimental simulations, archival studies of verdict patterns, and qualitative work with former jurors is essential to move beyond intuition.
Professor, could you clarify what you think the key research gaps are? Maybe it's just me, but I'm curious whether the medium matters. For example, are audio artifacts like the Pierce tapes more influential than televised images? Or does edited commentary do more work than raw live feeds?
An excellent question. Modality likely matters. Auditory evidence can create a feeling of unmediated access, while video confers visual certainty, even when context is partial. We need randomized studies comparing modalities. For example, mock jurors exposed to transcripts versus audio versus video, controlling for content, to estimate differential effects on credibility judgments. We also need to distinguish pretrial exposure from in-trial exposure. The former shapes priors, the latter interacts with judicial instructions. Finally, cross-jurisdictional comparisons, places with and without cameras, paired with outcomes, appeals, and clemency data, would help separate spectacle effects from evidentiary ones. In this context, artifacts like Captivated are valuable not as proofs, but as prompts for testable hypotheses about how coverage constructs memory. To summarize, we defined the case: a 1990 stage burglary turned homicide, a 1991 conviction of Pamela Smart for accomplice to first-degree murder, conspiracy, and witness tampering, and a sentence of life without parole. We examined three questions: historically, how media portrayals shape narrative; counterfactually, what no cameras might have changed; and prospectively, how media environments affect juries today. For further study, compare this trial's media dynamics with other high-profile proceedings, and look closely at how plea structures, recordings, and courtroom access intersect to produce public meaning. This then completes our present analysis. Thank you for listening, and as always, continue learning, but perhaps not through tabloid headlines.
Thank you, Professor, and thanks everyone. That was helpful to think through, actually. Until next time.